Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Strategic Growth Council meeting for March. Just want to note we have a couple of new folks, and we'll get around to that in a second. Where's my agenda? Don't want to go out of order here. That would be all right. Actually, that is the next thing to do. Let me just first welcome Kate White, who is here on behalf of Cal Transportation Agency. First time that Kate's attended, so welcome. And Jim Houston, I'll turn over to Jim in a second, is here on behalf of the Strategic Growth Council's newest member, the California Department of Food and Agriculture. We're very pleased to add food and ag to this now very illustrious group of cabinet members and others. And Jim is here for the inaugural meeting, so he gets the chance. First of all, to my mind, it was an oversight originally not having food and ag as part of this council. And having you now here in 2014, I think makes the efforts of the council better and more extensive across government. So Jim, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Jim Houston with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, here on behalf of Secretary Ross, who had a prior commitment. So she certainly regrets missing the inaugural meeting, but looks forward to participating and attending the ones in the future. We're really excited and very appreciative of this opportunity. Appreciate the effort that went into putting us on the council. And so thanks to the legislature and others who made that happen. I think there's, as Mr. Alex pointed out, there is a lot of synergy with the Department of Food and Ag and the work that we do and the work of the Strategic Growth Council. It was 2 years ago that attending a Strategic Growth Council meeting, I had recently been appointed, and we started learning about sort of how we could work on farm to fork efforts. And that was under the auspices of the Health and All Policies Task Force, was really what sort of started my involvement in the council. And I've been fortunate enough to see the work of the council over the past 2 years and of the HIAP, and really gotten an appreciation for the dialogue that goes on, the work and the planning that this council does, and just really looking forward to the future. The secretary, in terms of her priorities and where she thinks, we can help, is really probably going to be focused on rural areas, the needs of those folks, of the planning agencies, of the different types of needs and struggles that they may face, and of course the people that live there that face challenges that sometimes are different than those of urban folks, and the connection to that and where our food is grown and the accessibility of that food to all Californians is something that's really important. We're starting to learn how all of this stuff fits together. I think everybody kind of knew it, but it always nothing like a crisis to crystallize everything. And so the droughts really highlighted the need for planning and for thinking about if as climate change is a reality, how do we adapt and how do we plan and make sure that our folks still have access to the great fruits and vegetables that we have here. And I think there's lots of things that we're going to be able to contribute that we don't know of. I think that's one of the really neat things about the Strategic Growth Council that I've learned over the past couple of years, is there's just stuff planning-wise in the transportation sector in particular that I was just really amazed at, that you kind of don't think about how these decisions impact people and the decisions that people make in their daily lives, whether to work or whether to walk or whether to take a bus or whether to take a tram or a train, whether they feel safe, those types of things, just little decisions and tools that we can give to planning agencies and others that have these responsibilities that can make a real difference in people's lives and can really pay dividends down the road. So I'm just really excited to be here. Look forward to listening. We'll try and help where we can, and I think I'll probably take enough time. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We will we'll keep the hazing rituals to a minimum. Okay, so as always, my favorite part of the meeting, which is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Do I hear a motion? So moved. Second? I'll second. Okay, motion and motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the minutes have barely made it past approval. So, all right, with that, let me turn it over to Mike McCoy and the executive report. Mike?
Is it on now? Yeah, no? Okay. I'm going to start out with RAMP because we have really exciting news there. Thanks to high-speed rail, we have a position funded to organize all of the different efforts that are going into regional advanced mitigation programs around the state. And we use that to recruit and then interview a field of top candidates from around the United States, and made our selection just over the holidays, and got an offer out. That offer's now been accepted. And we're very pleased to announce that Dennis Grossman of Washington, D.C., the former chief ecologist of the Nature Conservancy nationally, has accepted this position. Denny has a long and illustrious history in the area of environmental planning, and includes being the senior policy advisor to the Intergovernmental Relations Division of the Nature Conservancy, being the head of science for the Nature Conservancy in Latin America, and being the chief ecologist at the Conservancy, over a 30-year career veteran in this field. And we really think he's going to bring both the scientific expertise and the respect of other scientists to this position, but also is a master facilitator and a really good organizer. So I'm very anxious to see him get out here. He'll begin his duties on April 1st, and I'll be trying to get him around to meet as many of you as we possibly can in the first weeks he's here.
I should note that in the interviewing process that we asked him why he would move cross country and take a pay cut, as you know we are famous for providing in state service here in California, and he said that the regional advanced mitigation planning project for high-speed rail is the most important project of its kind in the world, so he wanted to be part of it.
And he knows of what he speaks, so this is really a great opportunity. In other news, with regional advanced mitigation, we have 3 studies that the Strategic Growth Council staff is assisting with at this point. One is a public finance policy barriers study being done by Caltrans. Another is a private public finance possibilities study being done by a private consultant engaged by Caltrans. And the third is a study at UC Davis looking at the question of how do we bring regional advanced mitigation to scale. We've had some really terrific pilot project successes around the state, but we still haven't succeeded in making this the new normal, which is where we want to be at the end of the day. And hopefully these pieces of research will shed some light on that just at the right time for Dr. Grossman to begin using that wisdom to secure the lands we need to protect our biodiversity. With regards to schools, are there any questions about mitigation?
Hi. Director McCoy, could you quickly explain what RAMP is to those of us who can guess what it means, but it probably has a specific meaning?
Sure. It really, so in the state of California, under the California Environmental Quality Act and under the federal, the National Environmental Policy Act, we have had a history of mitigating projects one at a time as they come up, and the general rule of thumb has been to mitigate those at the location where the project is taking place with the species or material that's being damaged. So you try and get it as close as you can, and you get it to be what they call on-site in kind. And this has resulted in something like 12,000 or more EIRs being filed since the inception of the Environmental Quality Act, which means there maybe are 12,000 little mitigation sites all around the state. The concept that struck biologists beginning in the early 1990s was that this wasn't amounting to what it should amount to, and that the right way to do this would be to take a more aggregate approach and try and find truly meaningful biological reserves to sort of buy into with those projects. And so that's the Regional Advanced Mitigation Program. The schools, we continue to meet with the Department of Education, Health and All Policies Group, and OPR, trying to find a way to encourage greater participation between schools and local planning agencies. And Secretary Batcher has indicated a real willingness now to open the doors for us to work with the public school construction agency or department within DGS, and she thinks that this will provide additional leverage and possible incentive in having this dialogue. So Bob, especially for you, we're continuing to move that forward, and I do think that Secretary Batcher's right. This could be a door that we didn't open before and that might lead us down in a good direction. Barriers to infill. We're continuing to wait the completion of the study that you authorized last fall. And I think, Bob, do you have an update for us? Okay. I'll let Bob handle that in a bit. He's met with the group. Infrastructure planning has been something we brought to you at the last meeting, and something we've been thinking about for quite a while, because in statute it does say that you, the council, will review the 5-year plan for consistency with California's planning priorities and the environmental goals and policy report, should there be one. And what the real meaning of that is, it has to be determined. We have sampled a number of departments in your agencies and have found a number of different methodologies used to look at proposals that go into the current year budget and then the succeeding 4-year concept plans that total right now in the 2014 plan $56.75 billion worth of infrastructure. So it's a sizable investment, and it probably should be consistent with what we're trying to accomplish in the state. And we're pretty sure that people are paying attention to that, but it's in different ways, in different places. And we want to try and bundle that together to get a really thorough understanding of what the landscape looks like today in terms of practice. And then we want to bring a couple of options up to you when we understand what's being done today, come forward with some options about how to perhaps advertise what's being done today or normalize what's being done today. I think we just still don't have an answer to Secretary Rodriguez's question, what are the options? And we won't talk about it anymore till we come back to you with those.
Do 1 second. I'd like to just comment on this. And I would encourage us to think as big as possible here. There are, I read through the 5-year infrastructure plan, and there were many things that were not included in that plan. Transportation funding is generally separate. High-speed rail is handled separately. There was nothing in the plan that I read, this is a few years back, regarding water infrastructure. K-12 schools, energy grid. The amount of capital spending in our state is way beyond $56 billion per year, I am sure. And I think that this group has a role. You know, when I joined this group, it was because we were going to be focused on strategic growth of the state. We can't do that unless we look at all of this funding in total. And I would like to ask staff to put together a list sort of in general large buckets of where the infrastructure spending in California is going on, and then I think we can start to dial down on that and understand what's the criteria for that spending. Does it comply with the state's planning objectives and the state's environmental policies? And I think this is going to give us a view towards a big picture that I think we also need to understand performance metrics, and are performance metrics being used, for example, in our transportation spending? This has an opportunity to do this group has an opportunity to take a wide view on this by virtue of the members that are sitting up here, and I think because nobody else is really looking at the whole scope of infrastructure spending in the state. We're spending too much money not to do it well, and I think this is going to be a many-year process, but I would just encourage us to think as big as possible, and then we can begin focusing down. So I don't know whether there's some other input from other council members now, or whether you all agree with my direction to staff.
Let me just note that this obviously is a huge issue in the state. It has been historically in the domain of the Department of Finance and not easily relinquished. And but having said that, understanding the nature and extent of infrastructure spending initially, and then trying to figure out where are places where this council can have an input and an impact, I think would be extremely valuable. Yeah.
And that's really what I meant by what are our options. So I agree with the suggestion by Councilmember Fisher that we should, think big. I think that the intent here is to have this council, which is comprised of representatives of many of the major agencies that would influence infrastructure planning in California, use the council to review what's going on in the infrastructure plan, to bring the viewpoints of our various agencies to this to the plan. And so the question is, what's the best way to do that and influence the plan? So I'll look forward to discussing this with you in the future. And I think it really does reflect on the mission of this particular council.
Thank you. I certainly agree with Member Fisher in regards to the breadth that is needed to make this a comprehensive planning exercise. We started looking closer to home with the agencies represented here, but there is no doubt that enormous sums of money are spent by agencies and departments not represented here, including education and others. So I think looking more broadly will help us think more strategically, and I agree nothing could be more pertinent to the mission of the council. We'll come back with some options. And I hope we can visit in the meantime and get some input from all of you.
Mr. Chair? Yes. I've been trying to figure out how to say something that's not very politic in this situation. And I know that the Finance Department was going to issue the 5-year plan before Proposition 30 appeared on the ballot, and that really juxtaposing the fact that people were going to pay more taxes with saying, oh, geez, we have tens and tens of billions of dollars of spending that is out there that we should do. It was probably a wise call to delay it till afterwards on just the reasons otherwise that it was going to be delayed. But maybe it's 23 years in elected office, but hearing people speak in an open-ended way about how wonderful it would be to spend tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, because that's what the need is probably not politically accomplishable under almost any scenario or any circumstances. And so the question is before we get to a point that we raise expectations, and especially since the boss of a number of us that are cabinet secretaries appeared on Meet the Press or whatever it was just yesterday talking about the air of limits in California. It might be good to heed that moment. And so the thing about it is before people get too excited about it, and yet it might make the point of this group, if doing strategic growth is not just much better for transportation and the environment and everything else, it might even be cheaper because people are doing the right things. That might be the way to come at it. But I just feel obligated to say something like that just so that there's some awareness of it heading into whatever the discussion.
Well, that comment, John, makes me think maybe I didn't understand the challenge, because I thought what Bob asked for was simply to be sure that our inventory was complete of the projects and the timing of the projects and the process of the projects, so that $56 billion does seem not to have captured all of the spending that is on the books. And while I think I'm sensitive to the expectation issue of saying we have $100 billion in capital investment, if we have it over a period of time in the sections and it's well explained what the process was that approved that and which ones are bond, whatever all that is, I thought what Bob was asking you to do was simply look through the lens of strategic growth and say, is the integration of this spending considered at some point? And if it isn't, we should, and if it is, Godspeed. So I didn't understand it to be a suggestion or an inventory of the potential need, but rather what has already been authorized to be spent in some way. So I'm asking for clarification.
I didn't hear it the way you heard it. If it's that way, then it's probably fine. But I didn't hear it that way. It sounded like we were just heading off into something, and if it's inventorying what exists, that's not a big deal. It just didn't get said that way.
Right. It is very much an inventory, Secretary Laird. We don't. Yeah, in fact, it is. If you look at need, Brian Kelly has reminded us what the deficit need just in transportation alone is, and if we started adding up those numbers for every
if we're looking at need, I would invoke another often used phrase by our boss when he was spending some time in Japan studying Zen Buddhism, and said at the end of every day, they closed every day with the chant, "Desires are endless. I vow to cut them down." So I suspect that we're not inventorying desires, but rather things that are already authorized.
It's a rare moment where Zen and the finance department overlap.
Please make sure that's in the minutes, Adrian. Well, thank you very much. We'll begin with that, Secretary Dooley, with that framework, and report back to you periodically. I think Member Fisher is correct that this will be an ongoing process for quite some time, but we're anxious to get at it. With regards to implementation of plans, the Metropolitan Planning Organization process, self-assessment process is winding down. The final drafts are being written, and we will have a presentation later today on where that stands. So I'll skip over the rest of that item. With regards to working with the MPOs and local governments on implementing the urban footprint model, which you've invested quite heavily in and which is now very popular, I would venture to say that something like more than 60% of California's population is in an area being planned using urban footprint. Perhaps it's even higher than that. But it has taken a new milestone now, which is that UC Davis now has the full working model and is designing a curriculum with funding from the Office of Planning and Research. They had their first organizational meeting last Friday and will begin classes by the end of this month. They'll be training a pilot group of land use planners from a number of different cities and metropolitan planning organizations, and from this they will derive a more standardized curriculum during the feedback process from that first class. So we're on our way towards making this what you envisioned when you authorized it a long time ago, which is a truly open, publicly available tool for planning throughout the state at little or no cost. Sustainable Community Planning Grants, as you know, Friday was the deadline for round 3. I have the tally thanks to our friends in Department of Conservation who ran a wonderful program leading up to this. We have 89 proposals totaling almost $42 million, competing for around $16 million in funds, a ratio of about 2.5 to 1. So competitive, but not overly so, and we have panels of 3 who will read each and every proposal and score and rank those, and we'll come back to you at the June meeting with our recommendations for the awards. Likewise, the Urban Greening Program has $22 million in its last round, and they received concept proposals from 189 entities totaling $125 million, a substantially bigger ratio, about 5 to 1 want to available ratio. But they use a different process. Those were just pre-proposals. They then invited 66 proposals totaling $37 million. Those full proposals will compete for the $22 million, and we will bring that back to you in June as well. With regards to outreach, we continue to support the Sustainable Communities Learning Network, the California Resources Sustainability Inventory, and other tools and information sites that our grantees can use to swap ideas with one another and work with entities that are not grantees. And this is an important continuing connection between you, the council, and local government. We appreciate your support, and local government very much appreciates your support in this regard. And geospatial data, been added Terry Watt to the group of people that we're consulting with on the business of how do we create something that's truly interactive, web-based, has data and tools for users to organize, analyze, and share information. And we think we're close to having a concept that satisfies all those requirements. We're eager to design, put a little more design work into it and bring it back to you, perhaps as early as June, but more realistically, probably August. I think we're envisioning a day when a user from an NGO or from a governmental entity can get on the web, do their own GIS layer on layer, weight and value the things that they consider most important, come up with answers about ground where they would appreciate having some things done and not other things done, and really further democratize the process of planning. So that's something to look forward to. With regards to high-speed rail, station area planning, high-speed rail gave us another position to recruit for a senior planner to work especially in the San Joaquin Valley, consulting with communities directly and indirectly affected by high-speed rail. We have recruited and interviewed, and we'll have an announcement very soon on that position. Again, an excellent field of candidates. People realize the importance of this work, and we got the best applicants imaginable. And the funding wizard will have that at agenda item number 8, and that concludes my report. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much. Okay, so moving along to council communications and updates. Any council members who would like to make any updates? John?
I'd just like to do some brief ones, but obvious ones. And the budget has come out since this group met last, and we are continuing in resources to look across land stewardship places to try to figure out how we're going to have a sustainable land stewardship. And so there is money in the cap and trade proposal of the governor's that talks about ag land preservation. And so we are taking a look at what that will mean, and it might have to come through here. So I just want to put that on people's radar screens. Obviously, the legislature hasn't done its stuff with the budget yet to see what's in it, but we have the Parks Forward process, and the first pieces of that report in draft will start coming out in April. And the idea is to try to accomplish what comes out of that process in time for the budget a year from now. The ramp got mentioned. The ag land preservation is with cap and trade. Wetlands and fish and wildlife was referenced in cap and trade. We are working on mitigation banking and the different things that it takes to implement that on an administrative level. So we're trying to, across all these different places, really look for a way that our public lands are sustainable in their stewardship. And I think some of that will come through here, and it depends on how the budget is adopted. But I just wanted to call people's attention to the fact that that's there. And then the second thing is, I'd just be remiss in going to any group if I didn't talk about the drought in some way. And it seems a number of us have gone on the road. A week ago right now we were at Willits in Ukiah. Tomorrow we're going to be in Merced. And we are meeting with groups all over the state. And it's interesting because when you look at the date of December 11th as the last meeting of this group, it was, I think, 6 days after the last rainstorm that we went 52 days without getting the next one. And so the entire breadth of the drought has developed since that meeting. And if you really look at the percent of snowpack, which even despite the last two storms is still in the area we were in 1977, the previous record drought, when we and at the state and the federal government have given a 0% allocation out of the state water project for the first time in 54 years, where we have flows that are so low, there's a question about maintaining the salinity in the San Francisco Bay and not having it come in the Delta. And in 2013, we had 0 fires that CAL FIRE fought in the month of January. In 2014, we had over 425. We even had 2 in Humboldt County in January, one of the wettest places traditionally in the universe. And so the governor issued his declaration of state of emergency. But I think it's important to understand one thing, because some people default to their traditional political positions, like, oh, this is choosing one group over another, or but really none of the water system laws, allocation processes ever thought that flows would be this low. And so what we're really doing is rebalancing the system down to a level where we're trying to balance the same things, but at a historic low level, such that if we had released the water we were required to release for salinity and fish in February and March, there's a chance we wouldn't have had any water at all in September and October to release to keep the fish alive. We kept alive in February and March. So how do you lower it to do a triage amount and try to hold back a triage amount to be able to just rebalance things? And what I've found is the general public is 2, 3, or 4 weeks behind what the severity of the situation is, and many different agencies are the same way. I think happily now, not necessarily at the state level, but when we were standing over Lake Mendocino last Monday, it was explained to me, and I could not contain myself in public, that with it being at the lowest level in recorded history, something like 18% in the lake, they were going to release water for flood protection. And I was just like, what? But we're required to do that. And this is where that night at the Russian River Authority, anybody that gets water from that authority was instructed to take a 50% cut. And they were going to all sit there and watch that water go by them. That would be released for flood control. That's obviously somebody that doesn't understand how severe this is. And one of the people from the agency involved in that was standing next to me when I sort of lost it in public and said to me, I didn't understand how serious it was until I stood here at the edge of this lake and saw this. And so I think what it means also is with stakeholders, it is very difficult to understand the direness of the situation. People might look at what they got last year as opposed to what the situation this year and try to work off of that rather than what actually is the situation. And so, interestingly, to the extent this group is charged with more efficient, effective use of anything, and water conservation, it strengthens us in doing that in a very clear way going forward. But I just feel obligated to mention that as part of the report.
Okay, others?
Yeah.
Bob?
I wanted to give everybody an update on the infill finance work that's been going on now for several months. As Mike alluded to, the SGC engaged EPS, or Economic and Planning Systems, to prepare an assessment for infill development infrastructure financing options that consider real-world development test cases. This is largely a result of the loss of redevelopment financing, and so we decided we would take a look at what the world looked like without redevelopment. We have 4 test cases going on that EPS is looking at. One is in the Bay Area, Concord. One is in Sacramento, one in Fresno, and one in Los Angeles, Southgate. They're looking at current financing mechanisms, alternative financing mechanisms, and potential new revenue streams and funding sources. We had a meeting down in San Francisco where we met with public finance experts to ground truth the initial findings of the consultants who's going to play a role in, and this will play a role in developing the final recommendations. The consultant's going to report to the council in June on their finding and come up with recommendations for either new revenue streams or other funding sources. One of the things that I've sort of noted is that the unintended consequences of cutting off redevelopment is that it's making infill development much more difficult, and the development is moving to the fringe. And so one of the unintended consequences here, I know the governor certainly was not trying to push development out and cause more sprawl. But I think one of the hopefully we'll have some recommendations. I suspect that Steinberg had a bill last year, and I'm not sure what the status of that is right now. But I think we have to recognize that in lieu of infill financing, we're getting the kind of growth that we don't want.
SB1 is a 2-year bill, and I suspect there'll be a fair amount of discussion of redevelopment this year. All right, 4 quick things from OPR. I've mentioned them before, but they're all in progress, so if you're interested in any of them, please go to the OPR website and join the listserv and the process. The Environmental Goals and Policy Report is out in draft, and we're doing workshops around the state. They've been quite interesting so far, gathering some very good information. Second, General Plan Guidelines update, which is probably the biggest revision and set of changes in the history of general planning in California is underway. And if you're interested in that, we encourage your participation. We're also redoing the CEQA guidelines, which have not been redone in about 10 years, and that is heavily in progress as well. And finally, as a subset of CEQA under SB 743 from last year, we are very much engaged in replacing level of service and how we might replace that and what other measures for traffic delay and congestion might be appropriate. So any and all of those, we encourage your participation. Okay.
I have a quick question on the general plan update. How are we considering water as we do go through the update in the general plan? I don't have a specific answer to that other than I know that there are multiple areas under general plan law and requirement that require consideration of water, and also we're very involved in looking at climate change sets of issues which are also water related. So there will be a series of issues related to water, but I have not been specifically involved in where they are.
Mr. Chair, if I could comment on that for a second. Just because there was a very naive first-year legislator that thought his most favorite bill would be to create a water element of every general plan to prove that you actually had the water, and he could only get 39 votes in the assembly, couldn't get 41. So he schooled himself on this issue. And there are requirements that you demonstrate that you have water available for development, but it only exists in developments of 500 units or more, which therefore never applied to my assembly district. And so there have been real efforts to try to integrate that, but it still is a very open question, and I think that the CEQA update really is against existing law, and that's the problem. It's a question of if you could get existing law in the underlying way on some of the planning to change, you could get there. But
does it seem like this is an opportunity that
this might be an opportunity.
And could support?
Well, Ken and I aren't totally free agents. There's at least one other person we would have to consult. But if it were me in my legislative life, I would totally support it. But I think we have to just see how it fits in the general scheme of things.
So there are some very specific efforts that are underway in conjunction with the Water Action Plan, which Secretary Laird has talked about previously and has come up here before, including around groundwater and groundwater basins, again, connected to climate change and recharge and some of how those connect. So there are some very serious discussions going on right now around those sets of issues. And there is a general plan and CEQA set of elements, and some of those will be integrated. Okay. Yes, Jim.
I thought I'd take a quick minute. When Secretary Ross comes to the next meeting, she might want to update you, so I figured I should lay the foundation for those things that she will update you on. So just really quick, we are working on and hope to have finalized. It's not so much us as us, when a whole bunch of other people through Ag Innovations Network are working on an assessment for the farm worker housing and transportation needs. One of the issues that we're looking at, both in, sort of throughout the state, but acutely in the Central Valley, just understanding, sort of some of the infrastructure needs. So as we're thinking about planning and growth, I think this will help inform some of those decisions that are made. And then obviously the drought that Secretary Laird talked about, his agency, many Secretary Rodriguez, pretty much every agency is involved, but we specifically under the auspices of the task force are spearheading an effort to get some economic information about the impacts of the drought, and I think that will help in the immediate term for planning assistance in those, but and whenever you can get a sort of snapshot of how these activities are impacting communities, that will also inform planning going forward, so that we see some of the gaps and some of the needs. The roundtable on hunger is something that that Secretary Ross is working with the State Board of Food and Agriculture on, to sort of understand ways that we can address the hunger needs of rural Americans and those, or rural Californians, and those in agricultural communities and others, just sort of to get an assessment of how we can better sort of tap into the agricultural bounty of California and get those to folks in need. And that should be going in the next couple months. And then finally, the San Joaquin Valley Partnership will try and continue the great work of Secretary Dooley with the San Joaquin Valley Partnership, and just understanding the synergy that happens with planning and those needs. So just looking forward to all that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me remind people, if you want to make public comments, to fill out a form and bring it up front to Adrian. That would be great. And now we can move on to item number 6, which is...
Ken, just before we do, could we, Kate, can we just take 1 minute to... there's an item that I left off the report, and I feel quite remiss if I don't communicate it to you, and that is that there were 2 more pages to the executive report. They're the quarterly update on health and all policies, really one of your signature accomplishments. So I just wanted to call your attention to those last 2 pages of the executive report, and note that there's been a lot of progress made across agencies, as always with this group, and working with Farm to Fork program, working with transportation programs, working with community greening programs, all from a health lens and across all of our agencies. And so I want to recognize the staff and leadership of that group for their wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so let's go to Kate White and a report on the Transportation Agency.
Thank you very much, Chairman Alex and council members. I apologize that I'm not Brian Kelly. Secretary was called by the governor to as part of a trade delegation in Mexico City, so he's down there today. And then Undersecretary Brian Annis is actually at a hearing on the same exact set of topics, assembly hearing, the Assembly Transportation Committee. So you get me, you're stuck with me today, but I'll try to be entertaining. And I also want to make sure that I leave time for discussion. I really want to make sure that you are able to ask some questions. So I'm going to try to wrap up my remarks by about, thank you, 2:20 or so. So thank you to the SGC for the generous amount of time on this agenda. These are 2 reports that have been in the works for nearly a year, both of them. So I really appreciate the time here today to be able to present on them and discuss them. I am Deputy Secretary at the Transportation Agency, and we are a new agency. As many of you may know, we were just born on July 1st. And I started soon after that. And the new State Transportation Agency consolidated a number of different departments, 8 different departments, including, for the first time, we brought high-speed rail and Caltrans, as well as DMV and CHP under one State Transportation Agency. So in light of the reorg, which was one of the biggest state reorgs since 1968, I understand, of departments, the then acting BT&H Secretary, now Secretary Brian Kelly of the Transportation Agency, wanted to really take the opportunity of the reorganization to rethink, first of all, our priorities, our infrastructure priorities, transportation infrastructure priorities, how to think about those, where are we investing, and why, and what should be our priorities. And then also the governor actually called for the second report, the SSTI report, which is this State Smart Transportation Initiative. It's a It's actually a great organization affiliated with the University of Wisconsin. And what's really interesting about them is they're made up of former DOTs and former secretaries of transportation from DOTs across the country. So lots of lessons learned, lots of examples of DOTs that have successfully reinvented themselves. And so we have learned a tremendous amount from that group. And I'm happy to report that we actually have a 6-month continued contract with SSTI to work on an action implementation plan for the recommendations. So those are the 2 reports that I wanted to inform you about today. And the first really is came out of a work group that the Secretary convened over the last year. Some of your departments have served on that. It was outside and internal stakeholders, about 60 people, met every other month or so over the last year to really try to come up with a vision and a set of recommendations. And that work group will probably continue to meet, is planning to continue to meet this year. So that's the first report. The second report, as I said, was this SSTI report, which was an independent assessment of Caltrans, really looking, the Secretary, the Governor and the Secretary were interested in the performance, the communications of the department, and so that's what that is. And I'll speak to some of the details in a moment. So in terms of the California Transportation Infrastructure Priorities work group, both these reports, by the way, are on our website, calsta.ca.gov, both released in the last few weeks, hot off the press. And this first one, the CTIP report, interim report, calls for a vision, transportation vision. I'll talk about that. Near-term recommendations, and then also, again, looking through this year, continuing to meet, and what are some ongoing work and next steps. So I'll talk about all 3 of those. So first, the vision. So the vision, the consensus vision of the work group was really on efficient flow of people and goods in a well-maintained system operating at optimal performance, so reliable access to destinations, and also looking at true alternatives to auto travel. We have seen some improvement in California. We just came out, Caltrans just published the California Household Travel Survey, and we've seen a little bit of a movement. From 10 years ago, it was 85% of household trips were by single occupant vehicle in California. Today it's 75%. So it's actually quite an improvement, but it's not as fast as we'd like it to see. By the way, biking, walking, and transit use have doubled over the last decade as well, according to that survey. But we still have a long way to go. 75% of trips are still by single occupant vehicle. And so we're looking at what do we need to invest in to really make a change. Finally, the third point on here is really, we've been doing a lot of soul searching, I would say, about the state's role in the world of very decentralized local transportation investments that happen in our state with our regional transportation organizations, our MPOs. What's the role of the state? And what the consensus was in this work group is that we need to really have an integrated system. We need to have much better partnerships with regional and local entities on their transit systems. So those are some of the vision. And finally, on the vision, there was definitely consensus that we need to move beyond just mobility and safety, which has really been our focus primarily for many, many years. And mobility needs to be rethought to be not just moving cars, but really multimodal access to destinations, and that sustainability needs to be added as the third leg of the stool. The Secretary emphasizes this wherever he goes, if you've heard him lately, that it needs to be a core value and component of everything that the transportation agency and departments does. And so 5 themes emerged, and I'm going to touch on each of them regarding core concepts to improve the state's transportation system: preservation, innovation, integration, funding, and reform. And I put reform last because that kind of leads into the SSTI report. So on preservation, one thing we've learned is that the state, the transportation agencies, departments do not have a fix-it-first policy. Some cities and regions do, but we do not, and that's something that is really being proposed here. It's a recognition that in many ways our transportation system is exceeding its original useful life. We have 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old highway systems and many transit cars that are old and disrepair, not in great shape. And so we need to, and we still spend a lot of money on expansion when there's really a big gap of several billion a year to bring basically the current system up to good repair. So there's a real emphasis on fix it first, existing assets, and how can we utilize our current systems better, operating them more efficiently. And that's, of course, Fix It First has all kinds of benefits. For example, a 10-to-1 return on investment if you do in maintenance over delayed rehab or replacement. And then there's an opportunity as we're doing these improvements and maintenance to use more energy efficient materials and equipment. I know, Chairman Alex, you've been interested in the pavement replacement materials, and we have 50,000 miles of roads that the state owns in California, and how, as we need to repave, what can we think about porous materials to prevent runoff, et cetera, those type of things. So that's on preservation. Secondly, innovation. We need to have innovative approaches to transportation and environmental challenges. Director McCoy talked about advanced mitigation. That's something that we're really been talking about for a long time, but we have several different initiatives focused on advanced mitigation. And secondly, technology to improve the performance of our transportation system, so we can get more out of what we have. And obviously, high-speed rail is, I think even though I hesitate to put high-speed rail under innovation since it opened in Japan in 1964, before I was born, but it is, I think what we're going to benefit with our high-speed rail system is that we have many lessons learned from the world, and we will be able to employ the latest, greenest technology in terms of our system that's being deployed. The very best technology. And then there's also, just as many of you may know, just been an explosion in the last few years of all kinds of alternatives to private car ownership and to driving. And you see the pink mustaches now in even in Sacramento we have them. That's the Lyft cars, the Uber, car sharing, bike sharing. These are all strategies that we would like to see the state encouraging. And the Clipper card in the Bay Area, you can get on all the different transit systems with one card. It can automatically resupply online, those kind of things. Those are all strategies to really provide easy-to-use, viable alternatives to driving. And integration, concept number 3. So the regions are really, as you will hear later in the agenda on the MPO self-assessment, are really, SB 375, I can tell you from coming from the Bay Area, was really a game changer. And we're really seeing these incredible sustainable community strategies, really integrating multimodal transportation, housing, commercial, open space. The state needs to catch up. I mean, that was one of the recognitions that because of SB 375, which is a state law, but the regions were really in the driver's seat in terms of thinking about how to grow sustainably. And the state needs to be work with those regions, be an integrated part. And that's everything from our freight policies and priorities. We're working on a California Transportation Plan 2040, which is a long-term vision Caltrans is leading. These plans need to integrate with the regional plans. And then finally, again, high-speed rail will be the new, hopefully, interregional travel priority for the state, so getting between the regions. And that needs to be integrated with the local systems. I know Secretary Kelly recently went to Spain to visit with the high-speed rail authorities there, and he was very impressed as he got off the high-speed rail between Barcelona and Madrid, saw across the platform were all the local trams and trolley cars. So that's the kind of integration that we'd like to see in California across platforms for local bus and rail. Funding. I think in many ways the work group that came up with this document was kind of focused on funding because, or that was a major impetus, because we are seeing a drop-off. The benefit of cleaner vehicles is that it's all kinds of benefits: energy efficiency, better air quality, GHG reductions, but it also means that we are seeing a drop-off in fuel excise tax and gas tax. So we need to look at what are some new forms of funding for transportation. And the first point on here about vision is just the realization that we can't keep going back to the voters for bonds or whatever, taxpayers, until we have a really good story to tell about how the taxes that you are paying and you're voting on will really be a long-term investment towards an improved quality of life. And that's what this, a lot of our work is trying to get to, is make that case. And cap and trade revenues obviously are, transportation is 40% of GHG emissions, so we would like to see, and I'll get a little more into the detail, the cap and trade revenues in the governor's budget should be directed to specifically carbon-reducing transportation programs. So to that point on the budget, I won't go through all of this, but just to give you an idea about the funding, these are some short-term recommendations that came out of this work group, looking at cap and trade funds, rail modernization. That's not just high-speed rail, but we're calling the bookend systems that link to high-speed rail or will serve as, hopefully, encouraging rail use in the short term. We're already investing, for example, in the Caltrain electrification in the Bay Area. Sustainable communities, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about that here, because that's Strategic Growth Council's new program, assuming the legislature approves it, the budget, and we are really excited about that program. We think it's really an opportunity to do some silo busting and work with our sister agencies and departments to make sure that we are partnering with the regional agencies, regional MPOs, to have the most model, multiple benefit SCS implementation projects that we can come up with. So both affordable housing and active transportation and transit and TOD, all of that. And then the Clean Vehicles program, that's run by the Air Resources Board, but of course we're very interested in being the infrastructure part of that. As an agency, how can we support any type of clean vehicle programs and cleaner freight as well. So those are some of the cap and trade recommendations. And then there's also, this is a relatively good year, I guess, for transportation, because we got some loan repayment that had been taken out of the general fund. We got it back, some of it this year, as well as some final Prop 1B bond dollars. And what we're prioritizing is consistent with what I just presented in terms of the work group. We're trying to prioritize local streets and roads, operations and maintenance, so fix it first, active transportation, environmental mitigation, local transit, etc. And then in terms of the ongoing work of this group, we're interested in looking at how can we, not just these immediate budget items, but in the longer term, how can we identify new revenue sources for transportation. And so we're kind of hot in the discussion with some of the locals about the voter threshold, if there's possibility of lowering that from 2/3 to 55%. That's part of a larger tax reform discussion. There's lots of items that I'm sure would be interested in lowering the threshold, not just transportation, housing, et cetera. Mileage-based user fee, sometimes it's called a VMT tax. We are actually now part of a pilot, a Western States pilot that's looking at this, and it's instead of a gas tax, there's some interest in exploring how you can pay per vehicle miles traveled instead. I can tell you more about that if you're really interested. Pricing assets. I grew up mostly on the East Coast, and you don't have freeways on the East Coast. You pay based on how far you go on the toll roads. And so I always think that it's interesting that we have about $3 trillion worth of highways in California, and we have very few places where we actually do toll lanes or pay for use of those. So I think that's something that we're interested in looking at, pricing our assets. Goods movement, that is always going to be a priority. It's not just moving people, it's moving goods to market. STIP performance measures, this gets a little bit into what Councilmember Fisher was mentioning. There's an interest, we have a real interest in looking at how do our investments, and the STIP is the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's basically the dollars. Every 2 years we go through the process, how are we going to spend it, what projects. Really looking at those compared to our state planning goals, our state environmental goals. How do they line up, those projects? So those are some of the things that we're looking at on the work group, and then I'm just going to quickly wrap up here with reform, because that leads into the second report, the SSTI report. So with the reform, the reform effort, SSTI has been looking for many months now at Caltrans and done this pretty in-depth assessment. It's 100 pages. You don't have to read the whole thing, but the first 6 or 7 pages is the executive summary on our website, so if you want to take a look at that. And I'm going to just highlight some of it for you. SSTI did over 100 interviews of external and internal stakeholders at Caltrans. They worked for 9 months to take a look at Caltrans' performance, and these are some of their conclusions, the main findings. First of all, there was a recognition that the mission vision goals are not aligned with the current conditions or demands of the state of California. The skills and practices of Caltrans do not match modern demands. That managerial systems and practices are inadequate to motivate, hold accountable, foster innovation. There's stuff about the culture of fear. I heard a district director call it culture of resignation or something like that. So it might be more of that, but there's not the innovation is not encouraged that we would like to see. That all said, it's quite, that's quite critical. I do want to say that they also found many strengths at Caltrans, that there's many forward-looking staff. Some of them are behind me in the room. But just a recognition that we need to elevate the good work that is happening at Caltrans. It needs to be encouraged instead of marginalized. And that SSTI also found a very deep dedication among the leadership and many of the staff to public service, and an openness and willingness to be part of this assessment, and an openness to change. And not only just openness, I mean, there was really an interest in embracing some of the changes and recommendations that we had for the department. So, and that is, the recommendations fall into these 10 categories, and then there's all these sub-recommendations. But this is, basically my marching orders for the next maybe 5 years, assuming everything goes as planned. So first of all, a new mission, vision, and goals for Caltrans. Work is very much underway and will be released in the next few weeks, our new mission and vision. Secondly, matching investments to policy goals. I mentioned this earlier with the STIP reform, but really rethinking our priorities to support sustainable systems planning. 3, utilizing the new agency. There was a recognition of, as the State Transportation Agency is new, and there's lots of opportunity there to take full advantage of our role in this. 4th, aligning resources to goals. There needs to be some internal reorganization. There needs to be probably more investment, again, in planning and systems planning and sustainability within the department. 5, reforming guidance and operating procedures. This is near and dear to my heart because I experienced this on the sort of receiving end in San Francisco, that the urban street design guidance is really, really dated. It's very suburban, very wide lanes and that kind of thing, not prioritizing pedestrians and bicyclists. There's been some progress in that direction over the last few years with the Complete Streets policy, but SSTI says we need to go a lot further in reforming design guidance along with other operating procedures. 6, strengthening strategic partnerships. Again, we are a very decentralized state in terms of decision making, even where the money's coming from. A lot of it's sales tax dollars, and the counties are running essentially investments. So we need to be much better partners in this regional world, and it might require a new set of skills. Focus on freight. We need to support the economy. We're very interested in the Air Resources Board Clean Freight Initiative. 8, improving communications. That's both internal and external communications. 9, managing for performance. Again, we want to make sure that we're very outcomes focused. It's not just moving cars around the state, but what are our outcomes, long-term outcomes that we want from our transportation system, and what are those performance measures that need to be in place to get us there. And then finally, fostering innovation and evolution. There needs to be a culture shift. There needs to be more embracing of change. And that's a really tough thing to do. But that was the 10th and final recommendation. So I want to thank you again for the time. This is my contact information. I wanted to say that we want to work very closely with the Strategic Growth Council and also our sister agencies to move forward with new investment priorities, with reforming Caltrans, and really be even better partners on the Strategic Growth Council. And so please be in touch. This is my contact information. If you'd like to be if you heard anything that you'd like to be part of, please be in touch. And it's really going to be a collective effort. With that, I think I will open it up for questions, comments, and then do you want to take public comment too, or is that at the end?
We'll have public comment.
Yeah, okay.
So questions or comments for Kate? Well, thank you very much. I know OPR and the Strategic Growth Council is already working with both Caltrans and with the Transportation Agency. It's an incredibly difficult thing that the agency is taking on to do some of these reforms, and I think a lot of us feel that the report was tough but fair, and I know the folks up here and the agencies they represent would like to be part of that process and know the difficulties that it entails, and that goes for OPR as well, and we very much look forward to working with you in the process.
Thank you.
I'm curious, you listed 10, if you could go back one
Yeah,
slide.
sure.
There were a lot of recommendations. What are your priorities in there, and what do you think is what are the most important things for you to do? And that's a lot to accomplish.
Yes, it is. This is not a one-year project. The recommendations are actually broken out into immediate actions over the next few months, and then more mid to longer term recommendations. Some of the immediate actions that SSTI recommends is a new mission and vision for the department. So we jumped on that. Also, new design guidance for urban design guidance for certainly local streets and roads, or streets and roads that serve as state-owned, but maybe they serve as local streets and roads, which we have 50,000 miles, so we have a lot of those that go through cities and towns. And so how can we rethink the design of those so that they're really serving multiple modes and not just car throughput? They actually specifically urged us to take a look at some new design guidance. They're called the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO guides, sort of an alternative to AASHTO and some of the traditional engineering guides. So we're moving quite quickly on that. We would love to roll out some type of endorsement, adoption, or integration of those design guidance in very short order. Another thing that short-term recommendation that they made was on SB 743, which OPR is leading. That's to rethink the level of service metrics for new projects, development projects. And so Caltrans and the agency obviously we're very involved with that, but the SSTI says that could really, rethinking that could really be a national leadership move. All of these things could be, but LOS is used all over the country. So if we can come up with something a little more forward-looking and not just traffic at a particular intersection, then I think that would be a great early move for us. So those are some of the early recommendations.
What about the relationship between the agency and the CTC and the way that this whole system gets governed? Were there recommendations there, and what kind of opportunities are there?
That's a great question. The SSTI was very focused on Caltrans, so they didn't get into the CTC, the California Transportation Commission, very much. But obviously the CTC does have the authority over Caltrans' budget. They approve approximately $10 billion a year in transportation projects every year, or every other year. And so there is an indication in there. I think I mentioned it, but it would obviously entail a much stronger partnership with the California Transportation Commission and agency to really institute performance measures for the regional transportation plans, the regional transportation infrastructure improvement programs, the interregional. There's a bunch of different programming that goes on, but really taking a hard look at how do these projects that are being programmed and financed through the CTC's approval, how do those hold up in terms of the state's larger environmental and planning goals? That type of analysis isn't really being done. And I think SSTI is indicating that is something that needs to happen.
I should note that the agency has kept on SSTI for another 6 months to help begin implementation.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a number of public comments. Why don't we start with Jack Shu with Robert Ogilvie on deck.
I have some handouts. Can I ask staff to help distribute them?
Absolutely.
And while she's handing them out, I'll go ahead and start to save some time
Please.
for you. My name is Jack Chu with the Cleveland National Forest Foundation. I'm the president of the foundation, and another board member, Janet Clark, and I flew up this morning to testify before you on what we think is a very important issue. First, we want to commend Secretary Kelly for implementing this study, the outside look of how Caltrans is doing and how to improve. And so my comments are really focused on that study. First of all, you may ask, why is a forest foundation dealing with transportation issues? First of all, the Cleveland National Forest Foundation and our sister organization, Save Our Forests and Ranchlands, many years ago realized that the threats to our forests, to our wilderness areas in San Diego, were from the outside. That involve regional issues, regional transportation, and regional land use issues. That's why we were involved with transportation issues for a long time, for over a decade. CNFF is currently involved with 2 litigation issues, one with SANDAG, our Regional Transportation Planning Agency, our MPO, and with Caltrans. And I want to describe our legal issue with Caltrans to you, just so that you get a picture of how important we think the study that just got completed is, and how it affects us on a day-to-day level. First of all, I should say, we don't like litigation. We did everything we could to stay out of litigation. It costs us money, and then it costs money again because these agencies are using my tax money to fight us. So we really don't want to do that. We want to avoid that whenever possible. And because we want to do that, we worked with these agencies throughout the EIR process, providing testimony. We gave testimony after testimony, expert testimony, along with other organizations, other nonprofit organizations, in the case with SANDAG, even the Attorney General's office. Yet these plans came out with a disastrous output. I just want to talk a little bit about Caltrans and how this litigation came about.
I don't know that we want to hear a lot about the litigation. We're familiar with it. I actually come from the Attorney General's office. I have a very keen familiarity with that piece of litigation. So if you can kind of get to the substance of the comment, I think we'd appreciate that.
Sure. Well, it seemed like Caltrans fought us throughout the whole process, both regards to protecting sensitive populations and noting what are the negative impacts of development, in this case of I-5 widening. You mentioned Caltrans working in partnership with the MPOs. I think the correct term is collusion. In this case, the EIR, for example, was accepted first, and then the final EIR was published, and excluded us from making final comments to the EIR. Still, we had enough information to go to court on that issue. So the handout that I gave you has to do with greenhouse gas emissions, the governor's executive order, and SANDAG's own data in terms of greenhouse emissions going up into 2050. This is why we won our Superior Court decision with SANDAG, and now it's in appellate court. Well, Caltrans knew this was happening, knew this was the data, yet they went ahead with their planning with no comments to the contrary. In fact, no look at alternatives. And lastly, I think to make this study really be effective, we need a wake-up call at Caltrans. So what I think needs to be done, because we can't really wait for a long process of mission statements being worked out and working through the system, visions and goals. In the military, when something really bad is happening, they have what is called a stand-down, and you may be familiar with that, where the generals and the commanders say, stop for one day, and let's relook at what we're doing. So that's what I would recommend to Caltrans, and hopefully through you, through the governor's office, say that Caltrans needs to take one day, all its administrators, planners, and managers, stop for one day and look at this particular study, see what's going on, what they can do to change the organization now, because these projects are going on now. Billions of dollars are being spent that we can't take back on expanding a freeway system that we know we need to reduce VMTs by 15% here in San Diego, and yet they're building more lanes. It's just insane. So we need Caltrans to have that wake-up call. Please recommend that Caltrans at least have a one-day shutdown to relook at their current situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert Ogilvie, and Wendy Alfson is next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Council, Ms. White. Thank you for your comments. I just want to, my name is Robert Ogilvie. I'm at Change Lab Solutions, is this on? In Oakland, California. We are a nonprofit organization that works on creating laws and policies to help create healthy places. We've been very active with the work of the Health in All Policies Task Force of the Strategic Growth Council. And I just want to express gratitude, very happy that the Strategic Growth Council will be dedicating $100 million worth of cap and trade funds to active transportation. We'd like to encourage, I haven't seen the complete list of all the organizations and agencies that will be involved in developing program guidelines, but would like to ensure that California Department of Public Health and HHS are both on that list, given that health and creating healthy environments is a big goal of the Strategic Growth Council, and that there's a significant co-benefit between sustainability, health, and equity lenses in grant making. We think it would be very important for health to be at the table. So I just wanted to comment on that. And as I sort of heard your recommendations, those are some tough recommendations. I wish you the best in instituting them. And I note that there are $100 million set aside for local streets, in addition to, I think it was $6 or $9 million for active transportation. Just want to advocate that as much as possible, some of that $100 million be spent in ways that would encourage active transportation. And as the guidelines are developed for that, that health is central to what's going on. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. I should note that we don't want to put the cart before the horse, that the legislature does have to approve the budget, and so if you're supporting the cap and trade expenditure plan, we encourage you to let the legislature know as well as the Strategic Growth Council.
Will do. As a 501c3, we are prohibited from lobbying, but I'm happy to educate.
Excellent point.
Lawmakers
Education
to the extent
is good.
possible and allowed under IRS regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Wendy Alfson, hopefully I have that right, and followed by Joshua Stark. Either I'm butchering her name or she's left.
I'm Terry Parker, and I'll be speaking on behalf of Wendy. I'm the Secretary of the Board of California Walks. Wendy Alfson is the Executive Director, and I think she ended up going to the Assembly Committee instead of coming here since I'm here. So
Okay,
apologize for the confusion.
No problem.
But very briefly, we highly recommend, we commend Cal STA for undertaking this study and support the implementation of its recommendations, especially in regards to active transportation, sustainable communities, and climate change reduction, sustainability, and we stand ready to assist in any way possible with that effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Joshua Stark, and then Chanel Fletcher.
Good afternoon. I'm Joshua Stark, Policy Director for Transform, an organization dedicated to sustainable and livable communities throughout the state. The review conducted by the State Smart Transportation Initiative is a refreshingly candid and detailed critique, and more importantly offers a host of critical reforms. California, as you know, has committed to dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and that means Caltrans needs to be in the business of reducing vehicle travel. Specifically, Caltrans focus on old standards that favor expanding roads over all else must stand. While this is not the first report, the SSTI report, slamming Caltrans, there is a critical difference today. We see tremendous leadership coming from Governor Brown and Transportation Secretary Kelly, and a stated desire for change by the Caltrans director himself. Over the next year, Transform will make it a top priority to build statewide support for some of the report's recommendations. Transform's executive director had intended to be here today in my place. I think we kind of parallel in that one, and she stole my line. He's providing testimony on the exact topic at the Assembly Transportation Committee. He was called over there as well to speak along with some other advocates. Specifically today, he's going over the need to, one, have Caltrans support use of an excellent guide on urban design put out by the National Association of City Transportation Officials, known as the NACTO, rather than their highway design manual, which is simply inappropriate for city streets. Two, to support under SB 743 alternatives to level of service. Transform is particularly interested in vehicle mile travel reduction as a potential metric at this point, but we are open to having the conversation over time and really look forward to it. Three, supporting the smart mobility framework adopted years ago by Caltrans. This framework provides a great way to put highway expansion as a last resort rather than the primary way that they approach the issue of access. It includes working with stakeholders on improving land use, transit, van pooling, or other strategies that would work in a particular context. Last, Transform is very appreciative of the State Transportation Agency's push to add sustainability to Caltrans' vision, one of their three important vision and goals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Janelle Fletcher.
So good afternoon. My name is Chanel Fletcher, and I work for Climate Plan. We're a statewide coalition of nonprofit organizations that work to advance sustainable communities. So first, I want to thank all of you. You have been longstanding champions for sustainability, and we really appreciate your hard work and your leadership. Climate Plan supports the findings from the State Smart Transportation Initiatives report on Caltrans. We encourage Caltrans to implement the recommendations. So as you know, with AB 32 and SB 375, California is leading the charge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. By implementing these recommendations, we believe that Caltrans will further the state's planning goals. So we believe that one of the first recommendations Caltrans should implement is working with other state agencies to ensure the success of SB 743. With the elimination of LOS, this is an exciting opportunity to work together to develop a new measure that will better assess environmental impacts and promote infill development, transit, and active transportation. We also believe that Caltrans should move quickly to promote multimodal improvements in urban areas. Adopting design guidance as laid out in NACO Urban Street Design Guide will encourage local governments to invest in safe, active, multimodal streets. In the end, we hope that the Strategic Growth Council can partner with Caltrans and the California State Transportation Agency to ensure that these recommendations are implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Kate. Okay, moving to item number 7, Alice and Joe, Metropolitan Planning Organization's self-assessment update.
Hi there. So this is an update of something that we've talked about for about a year now. I think what we're ready to do is actually start showing you, at least unveiling some of the results of the SGC-funded self-assessment by the metropolitan planning organizations. And I think what I would like to do is basically introduce Ted, who is right behind me. There you are. No, I was looking right over. So what we'd like to do is just at least walk you through what the assessment was, how we went about it, the process by which we talked to and the consultant, particularly Ted Holzum from Minter Harnish, the process by which they went through and discussed the issues related to the development of the first round of the RTPs, the Regional Transportation Plans, and the Sustainable Community Strategies, and provide a peek at some of the recommendations from the SGC staff. I think we feel that the process was a really beneficial one for both the participants as well as I think what we'll see from the consultants in their the development of this report. What I'd like to do is also bring, kind of put a placeholder for June, and hope to bring back some actions to the council for recommendations stemming from this report.
June is sounding like a long meeting.
June is a very exciting meeting and action-oriented. So it depends on the length. It depends on you and them. So with that, Ted.
Thanks, Allison. Good afternoon, Chairman Alex and members of the council. I was thinking I was going to say commission from a previous meeting, but council. As Allison said, I have today some preliminary findings and observations from the self-assessment process. We're still working with the MPO staffs to refine all of the input. I was joking with someone about this the other day. When we started this, we thought we had one client, you, the Strategic Growth Council, and we quickly found out we had 19 or 20, depending on how you count all the MPOs and agencies. So a lot of stakeholders, a lot of folks involved, and there's different views and different perspectives that we're trying to build consensus on, and so that's what we're doing right now. But we as the consultants do have some initial observations that we think are ready to be shared, and as Allison said, in the next couple of months we expect to publish the draft report for your review and action at the next meeting. Just a little bit of background, and this is going back over some material I covered the last time I was here before you. Here's our team. Larry would be here, my boss, but he's recovering from knee surgery, so he can't move around quite so well yet, but I'm sure he'll be back in the thick of it here shortly.
Not enough active transportation.
Exactly. Here's our schedule. This did change from the last time I was here. Obviously, things got elongated, and I added a few more months just to reflect where we find ourselves today. Nothing else beyond that changed, and you can see currently right now we're finishing up the draft report with the MPOs and expect to have the final draft and final report coming out in the next couple months. And again, the purpose of the report, evaluating experiences from the first round of preparing the SCS as part of the RTP process, as well as the regional housing needs allocation, now that those are all connected to one another, identifying and documenting any successful examples of processes and mechanisms that were developed by the MPOs to implement SB 375, and then to identify issues and recommendations for some of the challenges that the MPOs faced as they implemented this new piece of legislation and set of requirements. So before I move on to that, what I'm going to be covering today, new material, includes my observations or our consultant team observations related to the positive outcomes of SB 375, and this follows the memo that I provided to Allison earlier last month. First, positive outcomes. Some characteristics of the MPOs themselves and the regions that we think are important when considering or talking about implementing SB 375. Obstacles to implementation of SB 375, and these are things that we felt or feel kind of fall outside of the box of SB 375 itself or what the MPOs themselves have direct control over. And then finally, the kind of meat or heart of the report itself or this whole self-assessment process, what the issues and challenges are based on the MPO's perspective, and then what the MPO's recommendations are on how to overcome those. So some positive outcomes. One was that the MPOs felt that there's been a lot more involvement in the RTP process, and there's been a lot greater understanding of the connections between regional transportation planning, land use, housing, and the environment. And so you have a lot more people involved in the process. There's also been a greater development of partnerships among all levels of government, from local agencies, cities and counties, all the way up through state agencies, as it relates to implementing SB 375, planning land use, planning transportation. And then in the RTPs themselves, there's been a greater emphasis on different modes of transportation. The MPOs felt that prior RTPs really just focused on automobiles. There was transit involved, but with SB 375, there's been a greater interest in alternative modes of transportation from walking, biking, transit, as well as automobile travel. Other observations on positive outcomes, there's been improvements in performance tracking and monitoring. I think the emphasis on housing and land use has increased both the scope and types of metrics that are being used to both report the differences among alternative improvements that could be made, but as well as how we track progress over time. The models have been greatly improved to assess both land use, housing, and transportation, and all of the MPOs were very grateful for the Model Improvement Program funding that SGC provided them, and they all said that they hope that there's more of that in the future to help support continued improvements to their models. And then, as I mentioned, there's been a lot more interest from the public and decision makers in this process, whether it's more concern over what the outcome could be or positive outlooks on how the future could change or be improved based on this type of regional planning approach. But there's been a lot more folks at the table, a lot more stakeholders involved in the process. Related to regional characteristics, there's two areas that I wanted to focus on. First is the differences among the MPOs, and I think this map shows the key difference, and we're all aware of it because we have 4 MPOs that are usually referred to as the Big Four, and then there's all the other MPOs, or the smaller MPOs. Based on the input we got, some key differences kind of emerged out of that. One was the amount of money that they have to operate on just in their RTP itself, and that directly corresponds to what their staff resources are and their modeling resources are. And when it comes to modeling resources and what the requirements are, the Big Four or the larger MPOs, more populous areas, have greater federal requirements for what they need to analyze in their modeling process compared to the smaller MPOs. And that's a key consideration when we think about SB 375 and what the expectations are for different MPOs, where a larger MPO may have a more sophisticated model, more sophisticated ability to compare different metrics, and that same level of expectation may be put upon a smaller MPO that doesn't have that. And so that was one of our observations. And then finally, the larger MPOs, they all have an established transit system, a hard rail transit system that none of the other MPOs have. And when it comes to thinking about investing in transportation alternative modes, already having that infrastructure installed goes a long way in planning future investments compared to a place that may need to think about actually building one of those systems or using the same types of methods that they've used in the past when it comes to transit. Another observation is more regional, and this is something that was we found true across all the MPOs, and that's that they all have very urban metropolitan areas, whether it's a single city in the smaller MPOs or metropolitan regions in the larger MPOs, but then they all have smaller unincorporated communities and isolated cities that aren't connected to these metro regions and specifically connected to the transit systems that connect them. And when we're thinking about SB 375 and where development is being and growth is being planned in order to achieve the objectives of increasing transit ridership, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, more growth tends to be focused into these areas where the transit is and the areas that are connected both to a metro center as well as to the other cities and communities within a region. Those isolated communities that aren't connected are quickly kind of set aside when it comes to allocating growth, and as a consequence, transportation funding can also be reduced. And this is both something that has been observed, but it's also a big concern of local communities, and this is being relayed to us by the MPO staffs, what they're hearing from their member agencies, where smaller communities are wondering, what incentive do we have to implement SB 375 when we're not really being included per se in the process when it comes to growth allocation, transportation investment. So that was a big observation we had. And I think when it comes to implementing the RTPs in the future, the question is, again, what is the incentive, and what is going to happen with updating RTPs and SCSs if these communities don't follow what's being planned in the RTP because they don't have any incentive to do so. And so that's, I think, a key question that we may see some outcome for as the economy improves and development starts to occur again, and what these smaller communities that aren't connected do, especially the ones that weren't planned, don't have a lot of growth or development planned in the RTP SCS. When it comes to obstacles to implementation, there were several obstacles. Again, these are things that we think fall outside of the SB 375, specifically what can be improved through the requirements, but they do have an effect on implementation of SB 375 and future RTP SCS updates. For MPOs, there is this a situation where there's competing federal and state expectations of the RTP. The federal requirements tend to focus more on improving mobility, and that could include adding lanes to a road, whereas the state expectations are that we improve the environment and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which could mean choosing to invest in transit systems over a roadway network at the, not the cost, but at the effect of increasing congestion or losing some efficiency because there could be a co-benefit of better environmental quality. There's also conflicting stakeholder expectations. For example, smart growth advocates may advocate for greater transit-oriented development, but then you have health advocates saying, yeah, that's good, but don't put it near a major roadway. There's a conflict there. And so that's a challenge for the MPOs when it comes to allocating growth. Greater resource and funding demands, and that's just a common thread throughout some of the comments we received. How do we continue to pay for things, both updates to RTPs as well as funding the improvements that's needed. And then limited infrastructure and transit funding, and this comes to the projects for the agencies, transportation agencies and local agencies as they improve systems where they're going to have funding to make improvements, maintain existing infrastructure to meet future demands. For local governments, the redevelopment issue, lack of redevelopment is an issue when it comes to infill, what mechanisms are going to be used to promote infill mixed-use development in the urban cores near transit. There's also a big issue related to infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure in existing urban areas, and where, how more intense development is going to be accommodated. You know, who's going to pay for those improvements to either old infrastructure or infrastructure that isn't sized correctly to meet that additional demand. And then finally, for developers and stakeholders, there is an increased cost when it comes to planning infill development and building it, both from a design standpoint, environmental analysis standpoint, and then the construction costs. It all goes up, and so there's a challenge there, as well as in some areas there can be public opposition to higher density development or just mixed-use development in general where you're increasing intensity near an established community. So those are the observations, and this next section is related to the issues and challenges that we have observed from the MPOs themselves related to SB 375. One is just the timing and amount of resources it took to update the RTP or prepare the first SCS as part of the RTP process. We heard anecdotally that it took 2 to 3 times longer, anywhere from a year to 18 months to 3 years to 4 years, that type of a time difference just to get through the process. And then as far as costs go, we heard it was anywhere from 2 to 3 times more costly. We're currently working with the MPOs to gather that information because we think that would be a very important data to have as it relates to what's required now under SB 375 as part of these update processes. Related to models and data, all the MPOs, as I stated earlier, are very interested and keen on receiving additional funding for continued model improvements. They felt that the last round of model improvements were very helpful, and they hope to get additional funding for that in the future. But another challenge related to models was what was expected of the models and what the information meant. There was the MPOs felt that some stakeholders and members of the public had greater expectations of what data actually means when the model spits it out, that it's actually based on reality and it's not used as it should be, which is to be a guide in making a decision. If it said a certain number of cars were going to be on a road, then that's how many cars there were going to be, and it scared a lot of people versus, no, this is an order of magnitude change. Is that the type of change that we want to be talking about? For performance measures, I think the big issue here is where the data comes from and how much time and resources it takes to gather and prepare the data used in reporting out performance measures. For outreach, the requirements of SB 375 are specific as to the type and number of different meetings that the MPOs must hold. Many of the MPOs felt that the placement of those requirements didn't really make sense with their processes, so they were hoping to have more flexibility in the future. I'm getting into some of the recommendations there, but just to make it a little bit easier for them, a little more fluid process for them to work in. There was also an observation that meeting attendance dwindled off as time went on, as people became fatigued with the number of meetings that were being held on the same topic over and over again. The MPOs noticed a similar trend with decision makers going back to their member agency boards and city councils, where they heard, didn't you just come and tell us about this 2 months ago? Or we're back here again. But again, it gets back to that requirement that they go back again at certain periods of time. For CEQA, the big concern was litigation and how much, and the fear of litigation and how much time and resources need to be spent to prepare a really solid EIR. For the MPOs that are continuing to update their RTPs, I'm under contract to a couple of them. It's a really big concern with the existing lawsuits that are out there. And so that's just a common theme that we heard over and over again was the CEQA litigation issue. For streamlining, everyone felt that it's just too onerous and too difficult to meet the requirements to actually be effective. And so I think that only one community to date, or maybe two in the SACOG region, are actually in the process of using or have used the CEQA streamlining benefits of SB 375. Hopefully we'll have more of that as the economy rebounds, but there's concern that developers are afraid to use it because they don't want to be a test case.
I assume that was done before SB 743 and
yes.
the changes to specific plans, so that could have a pretty profound impact.
It could, yeah, and that's a good point that there's, when we were talking with the MPOs, the legislation was, 743 was in the process, and they all pointed at that as a good idea of something that can help improve the streamlining benefits of SB 375. The final two related to the regional housing needs allocation and the target setting process. We identified several issues in this category, but the direction from the MPOs was that they already have ongoing efforts underway to try and improve those processes with HCD and with ARB. And so our report will document kind of the issues that have been talked about already, but we won't really get into any recommendations because the boat's left the dock on that one. They're already being worked on. And then finally on recommendations, at this point we don't have a specific list of recommendations to present to you, but I do have the categories of recommendations that we'll be preparing. The first deals with possible changes to the actual statute of SB 375 or to the administrative procedures or actions of state agencies and how they implement SB 375. I think what we're hearing is that there's some differences of opinion about how the legislation could be improved or the requirements could be improved. Maybe we don't need to, the legislation is fine, and it's really only the way that it's being implemented from the state agency side that really needs to change. And this will just be something that I think the MPOs will hash out as we finish up this process. And it could be that it's left open-ended, that it could be an either or, depending on how things need to be changed. The other is for the process itself, assistance and resources or funding for future updates to the SCSs and the RTPs. A lot of MPOs mentioned that there were certain aspects of the process that were improved because they had state agency support and they wanted to build more of that into future SCS updates. But there was just definitely a need to have additional funding and resources just internal for staffing, modeling, and things as they go through this process in the future. Another funding and resource recommendation or set of recommendations that are coming out of this are related to the actual implementation of the RTPs and the types of projects that get funded through the RTPs, the CIP lists. And this happens at the local agency, some through Caltrans, and then also through transportation agencies in the types of projects that get built. And there's concern that there isn't enough funding available, or there may not be enough available to create real change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and meet the other objectives of SB 375 without additional funding going towards those future transportation improvements. And then finally, similar to the RENA discussion and the target setting process, there's a whole set of issues that may not have a specific recommendation today, but they're going to be included in the report as something that should be looked at in the future, maybe in the mid to longer term, to just help improve the process. And I think that's about it. Related to the review, or the next steps, as I mentioned, we're going to continue to review and refine the recommendations with the MPOs. We'll also be consulting with state agency staffs on some of the preliminary issues and recommendations, and then prepare the draft self-assessment report based on that input and bring that before you for final action. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. James.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you for the report. Thanks, Allison and Mike. One of the things that I'm trying to get a better understanding of is what is the outcome we're expecting from a self-assessment like this. So far, what we're hearing, we already knew. And so I'm trying to make sure that when we're commissioning reports like this, we're framing the questions perhaps more carefully. And I know we were all involved in that, but as I'm hearing the recommendations, there's nothing here that we didn't really know already. I am concerned, and I know this has been raised in different ways, that only the MPOs are really giving input here. And I'm wondering, as you're working on finalizing this report, if you're going to seek input from others before you make final recommendations. For instance, housing people and experts who have to deal with the RENA recommendations if that comes to pass.
I can, do you want to take it? Or, I think when it relates to what we've presented so far, it's very high level. Underneath each of those categories or under each of the issue topics, there's going to be anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen specific issues elaborated on and specific recommendations. And our hope is that we have timing set to those and specific responsible parties associated with those. I think there will be some things that are new, but there will be a lot of things that have already been talked about and are just known. And I think this is an opportunity, or the MPOs view this as an opportunity to have a document that they have collectively worked on together and can be presented to your commission, but also to other state agencies to make change. Related to your second question about other involvement of other agencies or stakeholders, I believe that we'll be working with Allison to shop this around before it gets published to other state agencies, so those folks will have a chance to weigh in on some of the initial issues and recommendations. Our consultant team included folks who deal with a lot of these issues, transportation planners and housing planners, so our hope is that our experience is also reflected in in the report as well as practitioners at the local level.
James, in particular related to the, so what does this tell us that we didn't already know? I actually think that this assessment allows for almost an opportunity to take a breath, because what's happened now is that these first round of SCSs have been adopted by almost all the MPOs except for the Valley, really, and they're already in the middle of their second round. They've already kind of queued up and they're ready to go. And by the time they, even before this assessment gave them an opportunity to kind of take a break, and as a group of regional entities actually think about how there could be some meaningful changes to the process, to how they did it, and it allowed them to do it together, and recognizing those differences in size and in urban-rural issues, things like that. So I think it's actually a really good opportunity to pause just for a moment. They're not earth-shattering or groundbreaking news flashes, right? But what we want to do is, as a council or as a staff to the council, bring to you some opportunities for adjustments. How do we, and this is a good point in time to actually acknowledge what those challenges were in developing the SCSs, in thinking about how, from the MPO's perspective, what the challenges were, but then if there's anything from the state side that we can do to help with that process and with the end results, then I think we'd like to be able to acknowledge them. So that's kind of the opportunity there.
Thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We have one public comment from, looks like Jana Clark, or Jana.
I have a quick question before that, and that just has to do with circulation of the report to the legislature and communications plan. Do we have, is there, the bill came out of the legislature. I don't know how we can circle back with them and make sure that,
so SB 375 came out of the legislature. We are hoping to release the report when we release it to the public, to the legislature. There's, I think, interest, similarly, as I just mentioned, in how the MPOs addressed some of these challenges where there might be some legislative fixes. So I think they're ready and interested in the results of this report.
Go ahead. I don't want to destroy your name again, so.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jana Clark. I'm with the Cleveland National Forest Foundation in San Diego. And we are here because we have a long history of working with our MPO, Sandag, on the RTP process, as well as more recently the SCS process. And we wanted to provide a little insight into that experience. If the critique of Caltrans here that we heard today is correct, then the MPOs themselves must shoulder much of the responsibility, because the MPOs are the ones who set the framework for the transportation planning investments in the state's metropolitan regions. We are dismayed to find an MPO self-assessment process that focuses not on innovative transportation and land use solutions to meet our climate change goals, but on MPOs, agencies, staff frustrations about the planning process itself. Staff have voiced concerns such as having to meet with public and elected officials and educating the community. MPO staff even lashed out at CEQA, calling it not good for SB 375 or the RTP SCS process, and asserting that the looming threat of litigation will direct more focus and resources toward preparing a legally defensible EIR rather than toward better planning. We find it especially concerning that these MPOs are blaming CEQA rather than their own poor planning for their plan's failures to achieve SB 375's intended goals. Should we be encouraging MPO staff to question the role that CEQA plays when every California jurisdiction tasked with preparing general plans understands that CEQA does not infringe on good planning? In fact, it enhances it. Without CEQA, in San Diego, both the I-5 project and Sandag's 2050 RTP SCS would have made a mockery of AB 32, Executive Order S305, and SB 375. While MPOs seek to blame CEQA, we believe the Strategic Growth Council should direct them to look inwardly. For the reasons set forth above, we respectfully request that the Strategic Growth Council change the direction of this MPO self-assessment by requesting that the MPOs assess the efforts that they must take to meet the goals of SB 375, for example, reduce greenhouse gas emissions through coordinated transportation and land use decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Just as a quick observation, there are a number of state agencies that review the SCSs, including my office, including the Air Resources Board and others, and Caltrans and others that that have expressed some issues and have worked very closely with the MPOs on trying to improve them. And you know, this is a process that's new, and I think we're trying to work through, and some of that is through CEQA and some of that is through litigation, and I think hopefully through these various efforts we'll come to a better process. Okay.
Just
Matt.
I guess the question that I would have is that how do we ensure that we get a variety of perspectives on this process? I understand that the self-assessment process will be helpful, and it's good for us to hear about the experience of the MPOs in working with this legislation. But how do we ensure that we hear a variety of perspectives on how this process has worked?
You know, I think that is definitely, as we've received kind of the as we've received the initial report, I think that's something that we've definitely identified as a need, right? It's kind of a next step in not only recognizing some of the internal process-oriented things that the MPOs face, but also making sure that we also recognize how this may have been useful or how the process may have been useful for other stakeholders. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. I think what I would like to do is see first where the initial report takes us, and engage with some of the gauge how we might be able to bring in stakeholders to provide to do either a separate kind of assessment. I think rather than comment directly on the report, although that is an option as well, but I think thinking about some sort of discussion from those stakeholders would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I'd like you to give that some thought, because before a report becomes finalized,
yeah,
it would be helpful to, as I said, get a variety of perspectives on this process, or at least provide some context for the report.
Okay.
And so I'd like some suggestions from you on how we can ensure that we achieve those objectives.
So I think what I can see as a path forward is in this spring, essentially getting the draft report from the consultant to SGC staff. Also thinking about how to engage and get that variety of perspectives prior to finalizing the report. I think you're right. The context is important and critical. So we'll come back to you in June. Sorry, Ken. June. With some recommendations.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
If we're trying to not have them comment on the report, why do we have to wait for the draft report to have them comment?
They're perfectly. I think that they are welcome to comment on the draft that we have currently. There's no official process set up for them to actually provide comments, and this is a mechanism for them to comment on, but I get
what I'm trying to drive at is that we're sitting here in the first week of March and you say, oh, we can add that to June. It's like, wouldn't it help to be getting stakeholder comments before then if it's not related to seeing it in draft? And if in fact the stakeholders' issues are to look at whether or not some of this is working, the sooner we get those perspectives, the better it informs the process of the draft report or whatever we want to do.
I do want to be a little protective of the staff because part of hiring an outside consultant to do this work is because we're understaffed and can't get a full critique. So
then I would ask that within the context of us being understaffed, let's figure it out so that it could be in a timely way.
if you would have let me finish,
Okay.
I would have.
Just getting frustrated.
Well, okay. So, look, this process is a difficult one. We have a number of state agencies that have a number of observations about it from a state agency perspective. We approved as a board or as a council or whatever we are, a process to get feedback from the MPOs. Those are two significant pieces. We also need to get stakeholder input. Exactly how we do that and when we do that, I think it's you're right, we need to figure it out, but I think directing the staff right now to add that on top of everything else is
Well, actually, in a minute, you gave a more succinct explanation about where we've come from and where we're going than we just heard. That was very helpful. And, you know, I think the thing about it is that I also come from this perspective that I'm a former chair of the board of an MPO. I could offer a lot of reasons why they don't work and why they are immune from some of these directions from the state. And you could consult me for 10 minutes and save yourself a lot of grief about all this self-assessment. And I have no idea where some of the self-awareness is with some of those smaller MPOs. It's just a question of what are we going to do to get at the real issues. And you just laid out a good direction, but as long as we're getting there and whatever the appropriate thing is, that's a good thing.
I just wanted to...
Can I? Oh, go ahead.
On the focus of this is it's a self-assessment, and so the outcome of this report is supposed to reflect the perspective of the MPOs themselves. We've talked about taking this around to state agency staffs, not as a critique of what the MPOs have said, but as a way to bring forward some of the recommendations, because we want to be able to say this is something that should be moved to a high priority because there's already support for it at the state level, versus this is something that may need to be talked about more among state agencies and MPO staffs as to what the best approach is. So, and again, involving stakeholders in the review, I think that's fine and it's good, but if I guess I'm questioning what would the outcome be of that, a critique or?
Look, you had a particular job, which was the self-critique. I think that's a separate issue that we're trying to work through what else we need to do. So, James, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I agree with both Secretary Laird and Secretary Rodriguez in terms of the issues of context and expediting the input to the consultant. But I do think that context is missing, and it's important. If you finalize the report in June, if you bring it back to us and it has these recommendations, many of them will just be dead on arrival. And that makes the report not worth the effort, which is partly what I was getting at before. And if we're going to do this work, I think it's very important to frame it properly in terms of state staff resources versus consultant resources. Maybe the consultant needs more resources to hold a workshop or put this out and collect comments from both government stakeholders and NGOs and all the people that are involved in this. Understanding that, as Ken just said, that we were really giving you an assignment that was very narrow. The challenge with finalizing it, though, is that it hits everything else. It's like a bowling ball, and we just have to pay attention to where it's going.
I'll be brief, Ken. No, I understand the narrow scope of what you were asked to do, and I think that it's very, very important for us to receive input from the MPOs, who are a very, very important part of this whole process. So, I don't want my questions or comments to be construed as being critical of what we're doing here. But when we hear that there are going to be recommendations, legislative fixes, that sort of thing, what we need to do is then there will be pressure on us to consider, well, do we want to recommend any of those fixes? What's our next step? We can't really make a decision on our next step until we've got a little bit more context, had some more input from everybody who's involved in this process, the SES process. And so that's what I'm looking for. Okay, we're going to get this report. but then what are we going to do with it, or how do we make sure that we understand what our next steps are going to be with this? So that's what I'm asking the staff to take a look at. Part of that may be to inform your process by having some earlier stakeholder input so that what comes out in terms of your recommendations will be more meaningful to us, or that conversely, we can get the report and then we can make arrangements to get that sort of stakeholder input or input from other interested groups before we make a final decision on what we think we would be recommending.
So the reason I'm having a little problem here is that he was hired on a contract to do something specific, and now it seems like we're changing what we're asking him to do.
I'm asking the staff to do that. I'm not asking him to do that. I'm not asking him to do anything other than what he was asked to do.
Okay. So it also strikes me that there are three pieces to this. There's a state critique of MPO process. There's a MPO self-assessment, and then there's a stakeholder piece, and perhaps I'm missing some other aspect of that. But I think what we can do is to ask the staff how we put all of that together in a way that captures the landscape, and that we can present, if we're going to the legislature or some other forum, and to do so in a way that also is physically possible.
Just a quick response. I think I understand where the council's directing staff and how they're doing that. I think that the MPO self-assessment report in draft form, I think is on track, and I think it will be incredibly useful as a component to an overall effort. I want to be able to make sure that I can promise and deliver what you need to be able to do that. So in terms of the physical parameters of that effort, I will keep in touch with you, but I think the goal is to move this along and to provide the right kind of feedbacks that that staff can bring a recommendation to the council, and that council can be informed when they vote on that recommendation.
And there are several other, as I presented in December, there's several other efforts underway to evaluate and assess implementation of SB 375. The Institute for Local Government is starting up theirs, and they're going to be talking to cities and counties. Caltrans is just looking at its own internal assessment. So there's other things that could be pulled into this larger assessment.
And we had a discussion last time about, excuse me, doing exactly that, not having 4 separate assessments with 4 separate conclusions that reach 4 separate shelves. So, okay. All right, Janelle Fletcher has a comment on this item as well. Janelle, it got changed. Sorry.
Hello again. I just want to say thank you guys so much for this valuable conversation, and being a part of it was really informative for me to hear. I think one thing that I didn't necessarily hear being brought up, and may also be, I think, an added component that is within the scopes of the contract, is really to think about data. So as noted in the findings, there really is a lack of good data to support some of the use, some of those performance metrics, to really look at the implementation of SB 375. And we just feel that data is critical if we really want to make sure that these things are being implemented and being tracked. And so we really want to suggest that the MPOs, local governments, and even as part of this process that you're doing, think about ways to improve data collection to really ensure that we're tracking our progress towards meeting the goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, if we can move to item 8, Liz Grassi.
Hi there. Before I get started, there's a couple things I wanted to do very quickly. First of all, I wanted to introduce some of James's former colleagues. Dana Papke-Waters is here to help me with the funding wizard. She manages the project. And also Anne-Marie Rogers is here in case we have any questions about Cool California. The other thing I just wanted to do is pull your attention to item 8. That has a staff report as well as proposal overviews for this project, or for this item. And I gave you each a Cool California brochure that kind of talks a little bit about the funding wizard as part of it. So with that, today I do want to present information about 2 proposed outreach projects that SGC staff has prepared for your consideration. These proposals are designed to meet the requirements of the Sustainable Communities Planning Grants Planning and Monitoring Program, and they also seek to engage grantees beyond the grant cycle by providing information and tools that will lead to the implementation of their planning goals. Stepping back a little bit to the December council meeting, staff reported on the planning and monitoring program's current projects, our initial efforts to identify outreach opportunities, and a budget update noting a program balance of $765,000. Following that meeting, staff worked to develop outreach concepts that would assist the expected 120 grantees that have in progress or completed projects funded through the planning grant program, and to respond to your direction about presenting information about how and when projects move from planning goals and outcomes to develop projects that advance the SGC's objectives on sustainable communities. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and walk you through these proposed projects by revisiting the goals of the revisiting the goals of the SGC outreach program, outlining our request for funding, providing a brief overview of each project with the help of Dina, and then finally laying out a proposed timeline for these projects. So let's see here. Oh, I'm doing it backwards. Oh no. I may need help. There it goes. Okay. There we are. Okay, to review the goals for the outreach program. When developing these proposals, staff focused on leveraging the council's investments in sustainable communities planning. The proposed projects further the mission of Senate Bill 732 to assist local governments and regional agencies and to coordinate state agency activities in the planning and development of sustainable communities. They also they also advance the council's 2012-24 strategic plans, principles for action, which include advancing the state's planning priorities, leveraging our multi-agency structure, identifying resources necessary for successful implementation, and creating the potential for significant positive impact. Finally, these outreach projects carry out the direction provided in Proposition 84 to use planning and monitoring funds to support activities that assist grantees to design and implement their awarded projects. Let's see if I do it right. There we go. So we're recommending today that Council approve spending the planning and monitoring program funds to support the proposed outreach projects on understanding SGC planning grantees' approaches and best practices for successful implementation, which from now on I'll call the Implementing Plans Project, and phase 3 of enhancing the Funding Wizard's financial incentives tool. So the Implementing Plans Project proposes to engage the planting grantees that have received awards in round 1 of the program in order to understand how awarded plans will be implemented. And implementation, what I mean by implementation, is it refers to permitted shovel-ready projects that reflect sustainable planning goals resulted from funding work. So as I go through that, that's kind of what we mean. The project would identify themes, best practices, barriers, and champions and actions that lead in developing the plans. The Funding Wizard project continues the Council's collaboration with the Air Resources Board and the Natural Resources Agency. It proposes to further enhancement of the tool, to train and coordinate staff from SGC agencies on how to self-populate incentives into the system and review user interest, and to develop measurements that gauge performance of the tool. So I'd like to do an overview very quickly of the Implementing Plans project. And this plan does set out to understand how plans move from adoption to implementation of constructed projects that are consistent with regional sustainable community strategies and the state's planning priorities and environmental goals. It focuses on 20 Round 1 grants that were awarded $12 million to prepare specific plans or corridor plans. The project will engage grantees in order to gather information about the status of their grant work, current and expected actions to implement the plan, likely challenges to implementation, and information about the people, policies, and actions that provide the momentum to develop these plans. The project's final report will describe Round 1 grantees' progress towards implementing completed plans that will feature sections on the challenges to implementation and the resources and policies support implementations of the plans. The report will also contain recommendations for action that local and state government can take to move plans closer to implementation. And it will also suggest policy and guidelines that the council may consider as they develop future grant programs. Okay. So when developing a strategy for engagement for this project, we will seek to answer the following questions. What are the expected how will the plans come to fruition? What are the expected timeframes for development and construction? What challenges will need to be addressed when attempting to construct plan development? What people or policies will support and promote this development? And finally, what local and state government actions might reduce or eliminate challenges and support these efforts? So answers to these questions will help our grantees as they assess implementation options to invest in, plan for challenges that might arise, and garner needed support to implement these plans. These answers will also inform the SGC by providing advice on characteristics that put plans on a trajectory towards built implementation. So now that you've received a brief overview on the implementation project, it's my pleasure to introduce Dana, who will give you an update on Funding Wizard, talking about its accomplishments and plans for Phase 3.
Good afternoon, Chairman Alex and other council members. One of my many hats at the Air Resources Board is project manager for the Funding Wizard. So I'm very happy to be here today to present an overview of the proposal that's under consideration for you today. In 2009, the Air Resources Board approved a local government toolkit as part of an AB 32 early action measure to facilitate voluntary greenhouse gas emission reductions. And when we brought this resource to cities and counties, basically they said a database of financial incentives is a gap in implementing our projects. So in 2010, the Air Resources Board approved funding of Phase 1 of the Funding Wizard, really with a focus on reducing the impacts of climate change. In the first 12 months of our launch, the Funding Wizard received 9% of our overall site views on the Cool California site. And thanks to Strategic Growth Council funding in 2012, we were able to expand our focus to go beyond climate change and also incorporate financial incentives that also support sustainable communities. We added categories that were consistent with the SGC objectives. We improved the data collection and we enhanced the user interface. And in 2013, the tool basically generated 22% of our overall site page visits and 11,000 total hits. So this is now the second most popular tool on the Cool California website, the climate calculators. So phases 1 and 2 were mainly focused on developing a robust tool, and your consideration for Phase 2 really would focus on the outreach and dissemination of the tool itself. So as Liz alluded to, the proposal under consideration is for $50,000 to support Phase 3 of the Funding Wizard, basically to develop an approach to promote the tool to SGC primary audiences and increase the number of incentives through the SGC member agencies and departments. Second, funding would be used to enhance the user experience with a more dynamic search interface and a roadmap as well for planning, developing, and implementing sustainability programs. Third, a review and expansion of the tool's analytics would establish a baseline and track increases in users based on engagement, training, and outreach activities. So federal grants are updated daily in the funding wizard through grants.gov. Similarly, utility rebates are updated daily through our interface with Energy Upgrade California. We've also relied on our partnership with the California Workforce Investment Board to, and their outreach to state agencies to collect all the state agency grants, and those are updated basically every 6 months. So one of the main outcomes to the council's support is to expand our efforts to collect the state grants through our improved coordination with the SGC agencies, and we hope that this will result in increased coordination on some of the state grant incentives for planning and implementation of sustainable communities. So the outcome really does support part of SGC's overall mission, and to review member agencies' funding programs and coordinate opportunities to achieve the 7 sustainability goals. Second, we'll be able to measure the overall success of the outreach and the training based on how people are using the tool and the number of users that are interested in the SGC agency grants. A third outcome of the funding for phase 3 would further enhance and promote the tool to help us to distribute the information to assist with actually implementing planning grants. And we believe that this is especially timely because a lot of the round 1 planning grants are wrapping up, and it will be especially helpful to local governments, and they'll benefit from this streamlined information to help them with implementing their sustainability projects. Thank you for your consideration. I hope you'll accept the staff recommendation and approve funding for phase 3. Thank you.
So finally, I'd just like to go over a quick timeline so you'll kind of get a sense of what we're thinking about here. If council approves today these requests for projects, we plan to commence work starting in July 2014. Based on that, the implementation plan project would be finished by December of this year, allowing for information to be used for any future 2015 grant programs. We could use information received through this project for that. The completing phase 3 of the enhancing the funding wizard project would be another year, December 2015, and that's really because of the training component of it. We want to make sure we have enough time for that. So that's it from us, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure would Dana or Anna Marie.
Questions? James?
Thanks, Ken. My questions are about the first the understanding approaches and best practices for successful implementation. As a condition of the grant, don't the grantees have to send in reports, progress reports?
They do based on the tasks. So the only thing that we hear back when we work with grantees is, yes, we're this far in task 1 or this far in task 2. And the task for the plan is just to develop a plan. And so in the past, what council has said to us is, it's, so they've done a plan, so what? We want to know how it gets implemented out over time. And so one of the reasons we're looking to do this is to answer those questions for the council.
Is this not something, and I know Ken, the staff is short, but in your asking of the questions or in the reports that you're requiring, can't you just simply ask them? My question is, why do we need a consultant to do what seems to me to be...
A few reasons. First of all, we don't ask them. It's the Department of Conservation. So Department of Conservation is the one doing this. And at the time that these grants are given out, there are real specific information. When you enter into a contract, there are certain things you ask and certain things you don't. I did do a review of round 1 grantees to find out where they were. It was pretty time intensive. And this would have ask a lot more questions and really get into the implementation versus, was the project done, what were your issues, that sort of thing, as well as just the idea of with these projects, finding out, okay, so we want to get this permitted, we want to get this development done. It's nice to have a plan sitting on a shelf. How can we support
Liz,
and engage
if
people?
I can also pitch in to answer that question. James, one of the things that's plagued me, even prior to coming here, it has been a question that Bob has raised frequently, which is the so what question. You've spent $40 million on plans, and what did you get? I think that we often don't know. We don't know for a long time, and I think among other things we're trying to find early indicators of success or direction and get ideas that we might disseminate to others that are trying to move projects forward into getting a shovel in the ground. One of my colleagues once said, you know, this can either turn out to be real, we can actually change urban California, or this could all just be a civic magic ritual in which we do something that made us all feel better, but it doesn't really have an effect. And I think it's that condition that we're trying to understand better.
So let me provide a little bit of history here, because this has been an issue that I've been concerned about. The grants are done through the granting process, either through the Resources Agency or through conservation. And that process has gone, and they've done a nice job with the exact way that they do that. One thing that we have asked Liz, and Liz has taken a look at, is to see whether we can add in some additional requirements for further evaluation and response, and I think that will be occurring. Having said that, the concern that I've had with a lot of government grants and programs is that we don't then have follow-up to figure out what we do next and how they may tie to the next piece of funding, or to have some continuity. So if we do a greening project, can we then tie that particular project to something else, to transit development, to have it grow over time in the community? And so the council, I think in part at my prompting, had directed Liz and the staff to start doing that with, as you say, the round one, and we'll, I'm sure, ask you to do that with round two as those things come to fruition. And what we're trying to do here, I think, is to have a more rigorous process to try to tie all that together.
Then my question is $50,000 enough?
Yeah.
That's not very much.
Well, we go back to what Secretary Dooley said earlier about the governor and desires versus need. I actually started with a little bit more, and my executive director said, what do you need? And so that's how we came to the $50,000 number. But we did really look at kind of that the pre-engagement, the engagement, and then just pulling information together.
Right, thanks, Liz. And of course, on the funding wizard, I think that's awesome. So.
Yeah, and I will say about that to Dana, that everybody I've ever gotten feedback from on the funding wizard has been very complimentary of both the program and of you. So thank you very much for all your work on it. Okay, other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion?
I'll move approval of
Staff.
both proposals.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have funded it. All right. We have a public comment. All right. Jack Shu, you're between me and my next meeting, so.
So, Chairman Alex, you mentioned earlier something about all state agencies have been involved with this process in these RTPs. So I thought I'd address that issue. I think I want to start with this chart and the governor's executive order that I printed on the back of that.
Just for the record, you have the previous governor's executive order. There is a current governor's executive order that's similar.
I understand. However, you know, this order hasn't been rescinded, and if anything else, all the information shows that this is accurate, this is important, and it's affecting us now. And I'm sorry that Secretary Laird and Dooley is not here, because many of my comments will address their areas of government. This chart is more than just greenhouse gas issues. It's public health issues, it's economic issues, it's water issues, all of that is here. Because as that line for greenhouse gas emissions go up, we're also failing in terms of economic issues, better jobs, better health, and building a better California. So I think it is very significant. Various state agencies were involved, they say, with our RTP and our planning process in San Diego. CARB very well knew this chart. This was taken from Sandag's plan, yet they approved the RTP. Of course, Caltrans, over and over, never said anything. In fact, they just went along with the whole entire plan and are now implementing the RTP, even though they know very well this is the chart they're working with, that greenhouse gas emissions are going up, yet they're going ahead and never made a negative comment about the RTP. Then lastly, what I just handed out was a letter to the Coastal Commission from the former Senate Pro Tem James Mills. Senator Mills is still active in this time. He's 80-some years old, and he's a friend of the Cleveland National Forest Foundation. He asked the Coastal Commission to simply look at alternatives before they go ahead and approve a public works plan that includes the I-5 expansion project. Because Caltrans didn't do it, because Sandag didn't do it. And he proposed that the Coastal Commission simply insist that Sandag look at alternatives, or Caltrans look at alternatives before they go forward with the expansion. It's a very simple request, and that's waiting for us to happen. I was actually a former state employee. I like Caltrans, actually, one of my favorite organizations. But, you know, when I was a state employee, if an executive, if a supervisor, if a manager writes a written order for its employees to follow, and for 8 years the employees don't follow, that's called insubordination, simply insubordination. So when I see state employees, state executives, state managers, district directors sit idle, knowing this chart exists, knowing what's going on, knowing what the impacts are, and they go along with the plan, I think we have a real issue. I think that's the issue we have to face. And I think we, all of us, need to implore all of our state agencies, secretary heads, department heads, to speak up, to say that plan is not in conformance with the executive order. That plan is going to hurt our economy. It's going to cost us jobs. That's all they have to say. Caltrans sits on the Sandag board. They're not a voting member, but they're at the table. And time again, they have failed us. Department of Health could be there. Secretary of Resources could send staff there. And now the Coastal Commission can be there. We met with Coastal Commission staff, and their staff discussion, they sounded like a Caltrans planner. Their point was, oh, you know, if we reduce congestion during rush hour, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Everyone knows that if you build another lane on the freeway, you only get congestion relief for 2 to 4 years. Everyone knows that if you expand freeways, cars drive faster, emitting even more gas, and that increases the overall number of vehicles on the road. We have to fix that problem within state government, and I implore you to push that kind of action within state government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll give you the last word and say thank you to everybody, and this meeting is adjourned.
I know we need to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, but we have to start planning for July, right? Oh, I just said that, yeah. Because that's when the money is 14 days.
Oh, yeah. So that's why but I just wanted to let them know. Mike wants this first one. Yeah. That we would have some
Yeah, I was telling you, it's so nice having our building.
I know.
Yeah.
Come on down. Yeah, so thank you. And I didn't know that we were so late. Yeah. Because the last mistake I made was like I hate going last because I don't find out when my nervousness is. And I'm always the last
Well, we went ahead of James, but looks like he's.
Oh, yeah. I have to go say hi because you're so nice.
I wanted at least